Hello, my name is Pat Arts, and I'm here to talk to you today about the social and affective domains in addition to the cognitive domain. I have several goals today. One is to explain to you briefly what those domains are, and then why I use them in my classes, how I use them in my classes, and ways that perhaps you can use them that will make grading not more difficult, perhaps even easier, and also assessment not more difficult and perhaps even easier. I'll also point you to a few websites in case you want more information about these things. At Bellevue University, we rely heavily on Bloom's taxonomy, especially the cognitive domain. In fact, exclusively the cognitive domain for our administrative processes of review and approval of various learning objectives. Now, there's two versions of it. This pyramid here shows you the new version. That's the one I prefer. And for those of us who are familiar with the cognitive domain, these things naturally fall into place. This is probably where the bulk of university learning takes place, in the cognitive domain, and that's all right. But I think of it as kind of like a bare tree. It's a great tree, but it is a little bare with just the branches and the trunk showing. Now, Bloom left the affective domain a little incomplete. Krathwohl has come along and filled in quite a bit of the detail for us. And you'll notice there's a pyramid, so it should be fairly familiar to those of you who are big fans of the cognitive domain. And as you move up the pyramid, the verbs get more complex, the skills get more complex for the students. And we've really leafed out this tree now. I think we've got a more robust learning environment. One of my colleagues, Cy Lizey, has worked with some of his colleagues in assessment and come up with something called the social domain. Same pyramid structure and same levels of complexity as you move up. I admire their work, and I want to use this in my classes to help fill in some of the gaps left by the cognitive domain. A lot of what we do in the cognitive domain does involve other people. We know that, but we haven't made that explicit in many of our learning activities and learning objectives. The verbs are important. You need to have learning objectives with verbs. I just chose a few here from some websites that I found, some of my favorite verbs, things that I would love to be able to teach in a robust way. You notice that one of them I highlighted in red, prioritizing, because I think it can fall into all three domains. Quite a few verbs can be shared by 2 or 3, perhaps even 4 domains if you're a fan of the psychomotor domain. Prioritizing can be a cognitive exercise, but it also involves many times your own priorities in conjunction with other people's priorities as you negotiate a way to set priorities. We always have limited resources, right? So it's a choice, and it's not always just a cognitive choice. My daughter there holding a little baby grasshopper. If you've ever gone with kids out in nature, you'll know that they are naturally integrated with their experiences. Not only why questions, or how does this grasshopper live, but do you want to help me catch more? Why did mom scream when I showed her all of these baby grasshoppers? Do you think they'll die if I put them in a jar? Lots of interesting questions which span domains. One of my tasks for the coming year is to develop a new class called the African Experience. As I put together these learning objectives for the course, I naturally now want to integrate some of these domains. Now you'll notice I'm not rejecting the cognitive domain, even in the objectives which are aimed squarely at affective or social. Support literary interpretations with careful analysis. Support is going to be blending over into that affective domain, but still relying on analysis, a cognitive skill. Reflect critically. Once again, reflection being an affective verb, but critically being obviously primarily cognitive. Communicate in a reasoned manner. Communicate is a very social thing. You need to be aware of your audience. You need to tailor your message to particular audiences. But you're not just going to blather on about anything. You need to have information. You need to have reasons. I did not use some of the softer verbs that perhaps I wanted to use. Things like appreciate or empathize or serve. Those verbs are very powerful, But like I say, we are aimed squarely at the cognitive domain, and I didn't want to stray too far and start to cause problems. However, it would be wonderful if we officially adopted some of these other domains. I also took a look at one of my existing courses, a graduate class on ethics and decision making for managerial communication majors, and I noticed my verbs were all in the cognitive domain. This is a couple years ago now. Describe, compare, explain, investigate, recommend. Now they could blur over into other domains, but I was not thinking of them when I put those together. This is a very cognitive-oriented course. Um, could I stretch those verbs to include other things now that I'm on a mission to integrate other domains? I chose a picture of the start of the cross-country race at the state meet here in the past year. Everybody went by so fast. It's hard to focus on one girl. I couldn't even find my own daughter in the race at the time. And it's a fast race. It's done. You drive for hours and hours, and it's done in 15 minutes. Can I get a grasp on these many variables that I want to take care of and get them in time so that other people can appreciate them? I decided to focus on three things. One are discussion prompts, another being essays, and a third being the projects. And what I decided to do was tailor those to include multiple domains. I have some handouts for you here, and we'll be glad to go over those with you. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions. One warning here, my discussion questions are not perfect. My essays are oftentimes just a second draft. There might even be a misspelling or two in there. There's always room for improvement on these things. Plus, we're dealing with a 12-week course with multiple learning objectives. It's hard to fit everything in. But with those warnings in mind, let's take a look. Now that you've had a chance to look at some of the artifacts from the class, you have to ask yourself, how are these going to be graded? That's what the students will always ask. And how will they be assessed? That's what my administrators always wonder. Now, assessment is supposed to be this highly structured, perfect system which flows smoothly from university to program to course to assignment. Actually, it's more like this pile of railroad ties in my mind. Sure, we could try to stack them up, but it's very difficult to do. And we're talking about humans interacting with humans and then implementing things for humans. It's always going to be a messy process. We're going to try to make it fit as best we can, though. And the key is to have broad university outcomes that can span a lot of colleges, a lot of programs. Same thing with program objectives. We need to make sure that we can fit the courses in there. We don't want to get them too specific. Once we get to the course level, then we need to make sure that in our mind we are, and in our heart, and in our social interactions, we have three, in my case, three domains in mind. And then those assignments aim at them. The real key here, especially when you're working with adjunct instructors, is to make sure that your standards, your guidelines for these student deliverables are clear and concise. If they go over more than one page, if the grading guidelines go over one page, chances are nobody's going to look at that second page. You need to condense things, so we've got some grids here for you. You rubrics fans might notice a familiar structure here. As we peer into the fog here, a few caveats for you. One is that I was not trying to test an integrated approach. I am relying on the research of others. I am trusting they did good research and that this is a good approach. If you are a person who loves to test things with original research, that's great. Don't forget the psychomotor domain if you happen to want to include that in your research. And then you might want to aim at specific testable hypotheses about whether an integrative approach bolsters student learning. If you're an administrator, you're probably keenly interested in whether it boosts enrollment and causes high retention. If those things are true, what techniques are optimal? Obviously, we're dealing with humans once again, designing things for humans. It's going to be messy, but are there some things that work better than others? Are there some things which are simply too much work to make them practical in our real world setting? A thank you to those researchers who have laid the foundation for me, and I've included some websites for you here, and those websites often list the printed resources, the more scholarly research upon which they rely. And then my pictures, I also borrowed two things from the Wikimedia Commons. It's a great place to go, by the way, if you want images to use in your presentations. I hope I've convinced you that an integrative approach is valuable and that it can work and that it can be compatible with efficient grading and effective assessment. Let me know if you have any questions.